Start. Start. So good afternoon, everyone. So today we are going to see what is SSO and how SAML helps to implement SSO. And I want to set up an expectation that we'll not be covering how exactly it is implemented, but we'll see, since there are mixed audience here, I want to cover on a high level how the SAML protocol works, how this SSO works. But exact implementation details, maybe we can plan that for another session, because that itself is a big topic that cannot be covered in 1 hour. Okay. So what we are going to cover today is this. So obviously we know what authentication is and frequently used authentication methods in the enterprise apps. And then what is SSO and what are the advantages of SSO, and the SAML protocol and the authentication flow when we implement the SAML protocol. And then we'll see a demo and we can inspect how exactly it is working, the internal workings. And then we'll finally see what are the advantages and disadvantages of using SAML. Okay?
Sorry,
Yes, I did. Okay. So what is authentication? We all know, like, it is just identifying the user who they claim to be, right? So we need to identify the user who is accessing the application so that we can provide the services based on the user, right? And these are the frequently used authentication methods in the enterprise application. The first one is form authentication, which is quite familiar, like just getting the username and password from the user, right, showing a login page. And then we'll have the password hashed in our database. We'll just compare it against with that hash and allow user to access. So that's a basic form authentication. Ldap authentication. How many of you know what is Ldap authentication? You just heard about it. Okay. Rest, no idea. Okay. So Ldap authentication is about, like, let's see what are the disadvantages in form authentication first. So in form authentication, you have to register or you need to have an account in every single application, right? Let's say we have our client and we are developing, let's say 10 applications we have developed for the client. And every single enterprise application is using form authentication. Then the employees of that organization or client has to have so many accounts, one for each application, right? And he has to remember every single account, right? And so to avoid that, since all applications are related to the organization, it makes sense to use the organization's already available credentials. For example, AD. Likewise, we have Pramathi. Definitely, there will be a directory service. We call it as directory service. There are so many directory services where we maintain all the employees' information. A directory service, a directory server, where it maintains all the employees' details, like first name, last name. It's just basic details, and including the password as well. That is a credentials you are using to access your machines, right? And you might have already seen the same credential used for some other services too. That will come to that later. Okay. So what happens if our enterprise application, whatever we have developed, can leverage the existing directory services already available, right? In that case, we don't need to have a separate account for each application. The employees can just use their AD credentials. AD is Active Directory. It is a Microsoft product. It is one of the directory services. Same way, we have other vendors providing this directory service, like IBM providing Tivoli directory server, and Open Ldap. There are some Ldap servers too. Okay. So I'm not getting into that details. Ldap is a protocol actually. Communicate with different directory services. Okay. So if enterprise application can implement this Ldap protocol for the authentication, it can connect to the enterprise directory service to validate who the user is, right? In that case, we still show the login page to capture the credentials of employees. But those credentials, we cannot validate because we are not maintaining those credentials. We are not sure what the password is. And there is no way for that application to validate. In turn, it has to communicate with the directory service and ask whether the credentials provided by this employee are correct or not. So that is how this LDAP authentication works. So in this case, you can have n number of applications without maintaining individual accounts. Instead, it will talk to directory service for all the authentication, right? And it can also provide authorization too. LDAP authentication, we can also leverage authorization. For example, uh, in the same organization, so in Pramati, we are accessing so many intranet applications. Okay, right? For example, Corridor, Loop, etc. There are so many intranet applications. Let's say we have all are different applications only, right? And all uses this Pramati AD credentials. For this conversation's sake, let's say AD they are using Pramati. So all the applications uses this AD credentials, right? Now, with respect to authorization part, in any directory service, you can create groups, subgroups, any number of groups, and map the employees to any number of groups. So in that case, my group can be, let's say, Hyderabad. So we all map to first image India. Generally speaking, it is actually organization unit, but under organization unit there can be a number of groups, nothing but departments, let's say, right? So in that case, we are mapped to one or more departments, and in this LDAP authentication, we can actually retrieve the group's information, which groups the logged in user belongs to or mapped to, right? With that group information, let's say that group is mapped to a application role, user role in our application. So we have developed an application that deals with multiple user roles, and user role is mapped to a group. That means whoever employee logs into our application and is part of that group can gain access, let's say admin access to the app. Are you guys able to follow? Okay. If you are not able to follow, let me know. Just I'll go to the board and explain even clear. Okay. So instead of application maintaining different role and mapping users to that role, we can leverage the groups and subgroups available in the directory services to implement authorization. What level of access this employee can have for this particular application. In this case, the authentication and authorization, we are moving out of the application and giving to IT for better management, right? So tomorrow, if they want to reset password, one single place, they can just go and reset. And the new password can be used across applications. Let's say they want to provision admin access to one of the application. All they have to do is just map that user to another admin group in the directory service. So it is they can take care of all these things, and we can focus on only our application functionality. That is the advantage of LDAP authentication. You have centralized authentication and authorization system that is outside your applications. You can develop a number of applications and can talk to one single centralized source for authentication and authorization.
So all the requests will go through that particular service.
Yeah, that is what we use LDAP protocol in our application. In all the applications that we develop, we implement LDAP protocol, and that LDAP protocol needs some information. Where is directory server, which port it is running, the basic details, and an account to connect to the LDAP, the directory server. This information we configure in our application, each application. User enters the credentials, capture it. Using that information, we connect to directory server, give these credentials, ask it to validate. Yes, it is the user is valid. Okay, give me who the user is. Tell me who the user is, and also tell me what all the groups he belongs to, so that I can provide authorization to my application. So that's how LDAP authentication works. That will give more advantage. Mostly in enterprise applications, we don't go form authentication. Instead, we go with LDAP authentication in most of the applications. Okay. Now, coming to OpenID Connect. How many of you are aware of OpenID Connect authentication? You're not sure about LDAP? Definitely, I don't think so. Okay. So, how many of you seen the applications or websites where you have seen login with Facebook, login with Google button? There are so many sites, right? That means you are depending on other account. I mean, you are just asking if you are already signed up somewhere else. Why don't you just make use of the same? You don't need to register again in my site. So that is what this OpenID Connect talks about.
It will get some basic information from both sides.
Right. Right. So that getting basic information and all, like that is another what we call it as. That also I will come to that. So OpenID Connect is like, just tell me who you are. That's it. You, if you have account somewhere, OpenID providers, there are so many OpenID providers. Google, Facebook, like that. There are so many. Microsoft. So wherever you have account, some sites may say like just log in with OpenID. That means they are not very particular about Google or Facebook. They will just accept whoever the user is, and if he has account in some with OpenID provider, one of the OpenID providers, right? So in that case, so the way it works is like, let's just sign in with Facebook. Facebook releases actually an SDK, or Google also releases an SDK. That SDK, they release it specific to platforms as well. Like if you are developing your application in Java, they may give you Java SDK. JavaScript SDK also they have. Mobile app, they will give SDK. That you need to integrate in your application so that you will have that button in your website, clicking on it. Because other way of doing it is like simply ask user to enter, hey, give me your Facebook credentials. My login page I shown, asking user to enter your Facebook credentials. You enter your Facebook credentials. I will talk to Facebook and confirm whether your credentials are right or not, and then I will let you in. If I do that, who will enter credentials? No one, right? Unless you see Facebook branding or Google branding, you will never enter those credentials. Same way, from these credentials, we don't enter it in a different site unless we see from the branding, right? That's the reason they provide SDKs where they will have all these login pages, everything. It will redirect user to Facebook, and there they will enter credentials, and then the user, the basic information like email ID, first name, last name will be given back to our application. With that, we'll create an account. See, all our application needs is to identify who the user is. As long as we know who the user is, we can provide the data that is belongs to him or her, right? So that's the reason we don't really worry about what the password is and all. So that's how we provide use OpenID Connect. But this authentication has limitations. Or the use cases, if you see, we cannot use this login with Facebook or login with Google in every single enterprise app that we develop. Especially in enterprise apps, we cannot do this. Because if you say login with Facebook or Google, anyone can log into your system now. You are making your application open for worldwide users. There is no restriction you are applying there. You are simply accepting whoever the user is. If they have account in Google or if they have account in Facebook, they can let in to our system and use our system. Can be read-only access or anything. Authorization is different thing. But in enterprise app, we don't allow that. We don't allow public user to access our apps, right? Those are specific. We need to restrict it for specific audience. Maybe if you are developing it for client, whoever the users of the client, only those should be able to log in. So in that case, we cannot use this authentication, right? So these are the frequently used authentications across the sites. But with respect to enterprise, we use the first two. But again, let's say Ldap authentication, we talked about. Where it fails, where it cannot be used is, uh, let's say at Pramati, we are accessing so many third-party services. For example, let's say GitHub we are accessing, Jira we are accessing, let's say. We're not accessing, I think, but let's say we are accessing Jira, which is outside. And Google also we are accessing. We have our email account in Google, right? So we are accessing, so employees of Pramati accessing some third-party services. In that case, yeah, they're all enterprise apps, let's say, but still they cannot talk to our Ldap. We cannot expose our directory service, right? The Active Directory or TOA directory server, whatever it is. We cannot expose to everyone to connect to it. Further, it needs which port it is running, information, and this thing they have to implement it in order to connect to us. Definitely, it is not possible because those are third-party services. They definitely don't want to talk to our dietary services, and also we cannot let them see or talk to our internal dietary service, right? So in that case, it fails. We cannot use that. LDAP authentication can be used only when you are developing a suite of applications for an enterprise. All are deployed in their intranet and are used by their internal employees. In that case, we can use that, right? So in the scenario where it is failing, that is where this SSO comes into picture. Okay, so when it comes to SSO, so do you all know what is SSO? At least abbreviation, single sign-on, right? So where do you have seen SSO implemented? The day-to-day we are using Google, right? So you log into your email account, mail.google.com, access calendar. Calendar is a different application developed by Google. Still, you don't need to enter any credentials. Right? That is what single sign-on. You sign into one application and be able to access multiple applications without authenticating again. Right? So like that, there are so many services, third-party services available who have implemented this SSO. But that is one way of implementing SSO. So Google has implemented SSO, but that their SSO works within their products. Like whatever the Google product you access, that is where you don't need to enter again the credentials. But if you access some other service, let's say some Facebook, if you access, it will ask you to authenticate again using a different account, right? So if you are developing multiple applications, the same vendor is developing multiple products or anything, they can implement SSO and is applicable for all only their products, right? Similarly, if we are developing a set of applications for a client, we can implement SSO. But what happens if we need to implement SSO across the third-party services? That is also there, right? Let's say here in Pramati, we are accessing so many services like Jira, GitHub, whatever it is. What if we would be able to implement SSO such that you log into Pramati, access any service, you are not asked to authenticate again. It will just get into that, and those sites will be able to identify who you are. That sounds good, right? You don't need to maintain multiple credentials across different services we're accessing in Pramati. And that also gives more advantages to IT team. For example, if I am leaving this organization and I have been accessing so many third-party services, Jira I have a separate account, GitHub I have a separate account. All are using my office email address. Let's say I have created so many accounts using this office address. When I leave, IT team has to deactivate all my accounts in all the third-party services, right? Only if they deactivate, I will not be able to access those accounts when after I leave this organization. Otherwise, even from home, I can simply access it and do whatever I want. Definitely, Pramati don't want to do that. So in that case, how does IT team know what are all the services you have used from Pramati and what are all the things they have to take care deactivating every single site? That is very difficult process, right? Even if they miss one single thing, you'll be able to steal the information outside and do whatever you want. So to help with that, this SSO comes into picture. That's where we can use, let's say, Prometheus credentials and be able to access all the third-party services. That will ease all our lives. We don't need to remember different credentials across each service, right? So that is what SSO is. One type of SSO. Earlier we discussed about within the products of the same vendor, we can do SSO. That is easy implementation. Like you access any service or any product of the same vendor, they will see if you have authenticated or not. If not, they will just redirect to some service. Let's say you access any Google product, they will redirect you to accounts.google.com. Will have you authenticated there and redirect back to this product. That is easy. You have full control over that because all the products are developed by you, and the same implementation you can do across the services. For example, I think Chandu also mentioned like they have developed some microservices. They provided platform service for a client where whatever the microservices they develop, they can make use of this platform service for authentication and authorization. So whatever the microservice you access, it will redirect to this platform service, get it authenticated, and then get you back. That is easy. But this SSO implementation that we are going to discuss today is different, where you are in an organization. This is applicable only for main use case for this type of SSO is an employee of an organization is accessing so many third-party services and don't want to create each account a separate account in each third-party service. To avoid that, this SSO implementation we are going to talk. So the advantage of like user convenience, you don't need to remember so many credentials, and like password policies also. Like if you are able to create a separate account for each third-party service, you may be able to use whatever the password you want, provided that third-party service allows you to use simple passwords, easily guessable passwords. Like that puts in a risk to easily hack those accounts. So, but in this case, if you go with this kind of SSO implementation, then you can enforce policy in Pramati saying that your password policy should be this. You can use only this type of stronger password. So you have strict control over what password user can set. And help desk cost is like most of the IT requests, maybe like 30% of the IT requests are like reset password across accounts, right? That cost can be reduced. And onboarding, offboarding, that's what we discussed. Like offboarding, it is easy. I'll just go to the IT service and deactivate that user. That's it. All the services access will be gone in one single click. So Saml, to implement this kind of SSO that we talked about, Saml is one of the protocol that helps us to implement this SSO. Okay, so it is the security assertion markup language, that's abbreviation, and it's a XML based protocol to implement this SSO, and it facilitates both authentication as well as authorization too. So when we implement this SAML protocol, how the authentication flow would look like. That's what this diagram shows. So forget about this. The simple implementation we can do, like we want to use Pramati credentials across the third-party services. A easy solution could be like, okay, let me provide a REST API in Pramati, right? Which accepts the credentials, validate it, and say yes, this is a user, and let this REST API be consumed by all the third-party services. That is an easy implementation, right? But what's wrong with that implementation?
You will have to call this REST service across all the products.
Ah, that is one. Okay. Assuming like they have already provided a configuration where we can just give these are Prometheus URL and we followed some standard. This is how you will pass the request and this is how the response would be. We have developed our own protocol, let's say. That is easy enough, right? What's the risk? Sorry?
In every request we were providing the key.
Ah.
If that particular key exists in our application, which is very different.
That again implementation specific. Each product should implement the same way. We cannot generalize that. We cannot say we cannot control third-party service. This is how you need to validate it. It can rely on us to say whether the user is authenticated or not, valid or not, and what who the user is. That's all we can do, but we cannot control their implementation on how to validate the user and all. So the main risk, if you do this way, is we need to give the credentials in third-party side again, which we don't want to do it. We don't trust those third-party services. What if they just steal our passwords, username, password? We don't know, right? We're not comfortable entering our Prometheus credentials in Google site. So that is a risk. So we cannot simply provide a REST API that accepts the credentials, validate it, and say yes or no, or this is the user. That we cannot do. Instead, as we discussed in the microservices architecture or within the products, what it does, it actually redirects, isn't it? So you access one product, if not authenticated, it will redirect to accounts.google.com. or whatever the service can be. It is redirecting, getting the authentication done, and coming back. So when you redirect, it is taking you to, let's say in our case, if I access Google, no authentication done yet. So let Google redirect me to Pramati. I see Pramati login page where I can give credentials. After this, give it back. That makes sense, right? So I'm comfortable now entering credentials here. And Prometheus knows how to validate my credentials and tell Google who the user is. That is good. The same kind of redirection mechanism is what used in Saml. So, service provider, user agent, and identity provider. Service provider is nothing but your third-party service, like Google or Facebook, whoever it is, providing services to employees of Pramati, in our case. Okay. User agent is nothing but your browser. User using the browser. Okay. Identity provider is who is providing the identity. In this case, Pramati. Pramati is providing the identity of the user. Here is Vijay trying to access Google, something like that, right? So now, first step is like the user tries to access Google, some restricted resource, maybe mail.google.com. That is the app I want to access. It is a restricted. Definitely after authentication only I will be allowed to access. So if I simply put in mail.google.com, Google says you are not authenticated. Go and get the authentication done at Pramati before you come to me. Okay.
It's
So
like open ID.
It's like what?
WATH to okay. WATH is different. WATH is a authorization protocol.
Looks like very similar to what?
Very similar, but then in WATH is mainly for granting permissions. So you are trying to access the resources of the resource provider. In this case, let's say login with Facebook, the same example, OpenID Connect authentication we discussed about, right? Mostly in most of the cases, what goes along with this OpenID Connect. Whenever you are implementing OpenID Connect, you must have used WATH protocol.
What is exactly? Uh,
Right, I'll tell you that. So in WATH protocol, you have to implement their SDK first into your service, into your product. If you are allowing login with Facebook, you have to integrate their SDK. That means it's additional work.
Client, which is asking for the password and username of the, so identity provider. Right? You're talking
Right.
about that, right?
Yeah, like you placed a login with Facebook button. How that button comes? Only when you integrate SDK, the JavaScript SDK, you need to implement. Or if you are doing in mobile, then they provide a mobile SDK that you need to integrate in your app. Only when you integrate, you will be able to provide that feature, login with Facebook or login with Google. That is one restriction. So every time a new resource provider where they are integrating with, they have some work to do and have to make a release again before this feature is enabled, right? And also like in this case, Google is accessed by 1,000 companies like Pramati. How can you place? Maybe we can still do it, but their development is more in that case. Like they have to integrate every company's SDK they have, and here in this case, we need to provide Pramati's SDK to Google, sort of, right? And then they have to integrate before they say login with Pramati. That additional development time is there. It is nearly impossible to have everybody's SDK integrated into my product just because I am providing service, right? Another one is what protocol is mainly used to access resources of an a user. Some specific, let's say I'm a Facebook user, I'm logging with Facebook. I'll be asked, hey, this application wants to access this. Are you okay? Do you allow this app to access your information? So that is kind of authorization, mainly focused on authorization, granting permission to specific resources. My Facebook resources are being asked by this Google, right? So there it talks mainly about authorization. That's how it is different. OAuth and this. Okay, and also there, Google, Facebook has to talk to Google. Like if they implement login with Google, it has to talk to Google. So that direct interaction is there. But in case of this, there is no direct interaction.
But there also, it redirects once they're authenticated.
Yeah, that is redirect because you have integrated their SDK. When you integrate their SDK, then only you see login with Facebook button there. So that additional development is required, and that protocol is mainly meant for permissions. Yeah, but in this case, we are not providing any. We are not providing permissions for Google to access my Pramati resources. Any of my Pramati resources, I am not giving to them. I am not granting anything. Okay. So as a user, I am trying to access Google, and Google finds me not authenticated yet. So it has to redirect to the identity provider. It has to identify who the user is. But it cannot identify exactly who the user is, but at least it can see who the organization is. For example, like let's say pramati.google.com. I typed in. We have an enterprise account in Google. So I used to access by pramati.google.com. From the subdomain, it can identify which company the user is coming from, which organization, right? So in that case, it can redirect me to Pramati's identity provider. Same way, based on the domain name, it will identify exactly which identity provider it has to redirect to. Because I'm providing a service, software as a service, SaaS provider I am. Any organization can register an account. So I have to exactly identify which identity provider I need to redirect user to for the authentication. I cannot simply redirect to one single identity provider because I am not maintaining anything. Only Pramati can take care of my authentication, right? So,
like when we log in into Gmail, like we used to write our ID at the image engineer, then it send us to the image engineer, right?
Yeah. So the way you can identify is like either the subdomain, like let's say if it is imagineer.google.com is there, then it can easily identify, okay, I need to forward this user to Imagineer identity provider. Otherwise, few sites implement this by getting the email address first. Ask the user to enter email address first. Email address will have the domain. Based on that also, it can identify who the user is, which organization is coming from, and redirect to that particular identity provider. Both the ways you can do. Okay. Yeah, a few sites do that. Even Jira, I think they do that. Okay. So in this case, I'm trying to access Google. Google identified that I am from Pramati, and it has to redirect me to Pramati's identity provider. But it won't talk to identity provider directly. That is a key thing in this implementation. In this entire authentication flow, service provider will not talk to identity provider. So Google will never talk to Pramati, never communicate. So I'm entering the URL in the browser only, right? The service provider will tell browser, here is where you need to go or redirect the user to authenticate before you come to me. So as a response, it will tell the browser, this is where you should go. And browser will forward that request to Pramati's identity provider here. There I will see Pramati login page and I enter my credentials. As soon as the authentication is done, now the identity provider will tell browser again, here is the user, take to the original request like the google.com. Now browser will pass on that response to service provider. Service provider validates the response. Okay, who the user is, it will parse the response and identify who the user is. Based on the user, it provides services. It can do authorization. It can be done in the identity provider wise. Likewise, we talked about in Ldap authentication groups and all. Identity provider also can have groups. Based on that group information also, it can provide services, or it can have its own authorization. Like once a user is identified, it can know which role this user belongs to and provide the services accordingly. Okay. So this is how the flow works. Are there any questions in this flow?
Like when we request it direct us to Pramati website.
Right.
From here we get authenticated.
Yes.
And it is sending some response.
Response to browser. Browser now.
To Google.
Yeah, browser will pass that response to Google. Google will validate that response, identify who the user is, and will allow user to get into the Google
Some information from here it is going there. Like from
response.
Pramati response,
Okay.
some information will go there so that they will maintain their own credential.
Right. Credentials will not be maintained. A user record will be maintained for my email address, let's say. So Pramati gives vijay.keta@imagineer.com.
Is a person.
Huh? Yeah, who the person authenticated just. Any other questions? Okay, we'll see how the sample application will look like. So this is a sample application. So let's say this is google.com. I'm trying to access. Okay, so I clicked on, so on clicking here, it will try to access some restricted resource, maybe mail.google.com or anything like that. So on clicking that, it identifies I'm not authenticated yet, and it has to take me to Pramati login page. So if you see the URL got changed, dev something Okta. So Okta is an identity provider. So there are so many SAML identity providers. It is nothing but a software that you need to install. Okay, identity provider is nothing but a software that you need to install in each organization. Let's say in Pramati, we need to install this Okta here. So Okta will take care of this authentication. Okta, behind Okta, there will be directory services. Like Pramati has already a directory service. It will put Okta in front of it so that browser will redirect request to Okta. Okta will talk behind the scenes like to the directory service to get authentication done and then give it back. So in this case, Okta page is shown. That's nothing but Pramati's identity provider. So now I have, so you can customize this page however you want, this login page. So you will ideally see Pramati login page here because it is identity provider of Pramati. Then again, you can see at the top connecting to some app name. This is what you see when you log in with Facebook also. Someone's app you're trying to connect, right? So same thing here. We'll see how that is coming. So by looking at it, since it is from the login page, I'm comfortable to enter my credentials. So once I log into my identity provider, it is passing on the response back to Google. Now you can see localhost. There's nothing but your Google account, let's say. So it captured the response sent, it passed and listed down what all the attributes got in the response. Is it clear? Okay. So now we'll go one step further, how exactly the communication went back and forth.
Earlier the authentication was Pramati.
Yeah.
Here you enter the Gmail ID.
We don't have Okta installed here. So it is an online account I registered. So I'm just simulating it.
So you're not doing global logout here.
No, I'll come to that. It's just sample app to demonstrate. I'm not getting into the implementation details actually. So this is to show high level how the flow will work end to end. What all the requests sent, what is the response got to inspect that. So because the implementation itself is another session we need to take. The Spring Security and all. So let me enable the trace here. So I'm trying to access the Google now. I'm clicking it. Okay. So here if you see Saml, this is a request, Saml request going on. So basically what it does is when you access Google, it knows you are the user from Pramati. What it does is it will prepare the authentication request based on the Pramati identity provider. So this authentication request contains information where it has to go and all that we'll see also. We'll inspect how the request will look like. So that is what given back to browser. Browser is giving the same authentication request to Okta. Okta is from this identity provider in this case. Okay. So this is a SAML request sent, and I'm in Okta now. Okay. I will see that again. But are you able to see it is a SAML request sent? But I will show you the XML how it will look like. So it is logged in, and you can see there is another URL hit here, SSO. This is actually a Google one. Localhost is nothing but Google in our case. Okay. So there is a response given to Google. How this is a SAML response. Okay. So this is actually base 64 encoded. The response, SAML response is XML content. It is base 64 encoded and given. So what Google does is it will base 64 decode it first, and then we'll try to understand what's the response, who the user is. Okay. And since the response is valid and it identifies the who the user is, it is allowing me to get in the app. So now we'll see how this SAML request is sent. I can see there is a XML content. This is what sent. I'll show you a bigger one. XML. So here is how the SAML request would look like. Let me zoom in. Okay, it's clear, right? So it is an authentication request, and you can see here there will not be much information in the request. Response is where you can see more information, who the user is and all, but it tells the assertion consumer URL is nothing but where it is expecting to receive the response. Google is initiating this request, and it is telling in the request, after the request is processed, the authentication is done, this is where you need to give me the response. So that is what localhost, that's a Google URL. And you can see destination. Destination is like in Okta, or you can say like Pramati, I can access so many services, right? So Okta should know which service I'm trying to access now. So that is what Google is sending. Okay, in Okta, this is the app. It's nothing but Google app. Let's say I created an app in Okta, that also we'll see how that is. So basically here it is telling which app the user is trying to access, which service, nothing but Google in this case. And you can see the whole this signature block that I'll come to it later if time permits, because this is basically a digital certificate signing. You can Google it, how digital certificate signing works. Okay, so basically here it is signing this request digitally and sending it, because it should not be tampered in between. To avoid that, it sends digitally signed request. The same way response also will have a digital signature that Google will validate, like, okay, nobody has intercepted this and updated the request or changed the content in this response and given back to assure that it will verify the digital signature. So in the request, we'll not see much. We'll see how the response would look like. So here is the response. So response is where the destination is, who this response is sending to, and then you can see this is again digital signature that you can ignore. It is basically digitally signed response. And the status, it is success. So authentication is success. And the Saml assertion is where you can see the information of the user. You can see here my email address. This is a user, right? And then you can configure in Okta which attributes you want to share in the response, like first name, last name, email. There can be any other information you want to share. So I have configured it to share first name, last name, and the email address. That's what you can see here. So here is my first name and the last name here, and my email address. So this is a response it has passed and showing me the same attributes here. This is what it is. Okay. So that's how the SAML request and response would look like. And now, how the SAML request is sent. That is another aspect that you will not see here, but I'll show you somehow. So to this URL, it has actually submitted the SAML request, right? How this request submission is done, actually, there is a login request Google. As a response to this request, as a Google login request I have sent, as a response to that request, what it does is it will give you a form back, HTML form. Okay, it will not give you the SAML request directly as a response. What it does is it will give you a form that will contain the SAML request. That you can see. Let me copy here, copy a URL. Here, actually, if you see the preview response, it says failed to load response data. It is basically, it's not able to show that preview of that content because there is no preview for that HTML form. But actually, if you put the same request outside in terminal, you will see actual form, but I have captured that. I'll show you. Okay. So this is the response it gives for the login request. The HTML content. What it has is, you can see body on load. It is trying to submit the form. As soon as the page is rendering, it will submit something. What it submits? You can see the content of the form. There is an input hidden element. There is a hidden HTML element. That field, the hidden control has a value. This is what base 64 encoded. The name you can see SAML request. So this is a base 64 encoded one, which is there in the hidden element. As soon as this page renders, it will submit. Submit to where? Okta. This is how it works. So basically, when it sent the login request to Google, it given the HTML form back. It did not actually redirect. It given the form back, HTML form. And it is trying to load that HTML form in the browser. But in the transition, you will not see anything because there is no visual element in this. There is only one hidden element in this form. Right? So as soon as it loads, the HTML form is loaded, it will submit the SAML request to Okta. That is where it will be taken to Okta login page. So now we will see how we should configure in Okta the app for this. Actually, the login flow that we have seen, there are actually two ways you can log in to Google. One is we call it as service provider initiated login or identity provider initiated login. Service provider initiated login is what we have seen. because we try to access service provider directly, it has initiated this login flow. It is sending back to the Okta and then coming back, right? The other way of doing it is IDP initiated. IDP initiated in the sense Pramati initiated, Pramati Okta initiated, right? So as a user, what I do, I log into Pramati first, right? So this is my Pramati portal, assume. This Okta is my Pramati's portal, corridor.pramati.com. If I access, this is what I see, let's say. And I can see what all the apps I have got access to. Saml, this is what we have seen in the login page, which app you are trying to connect, right? This is what it is. So this is one of the app configured in Okta and can be provisioned to any employee of Pramati. So when I provision that, you will see all the apps that I have access to in my portal. Just click on it. I'm directly in. No authentication is asked. Because I already logged into portal, there is a session enabled with Pramati already, Pramati Sakta. That's the reason when I try to access Google now, it will directly let the user in, right? So in this case, the flow would be like directly the SAML response is, the SAML response is what will be sent to Google directly. In the case browser, it will give it to browser and browser will take. So we'll not have that first part. And in this case, I'm trying to Google directly, accessing directly now. It will also let me in because I still have the session established with Okta. But the same thing if I log out from Okta. I'm trying to access Google again. Okay, I'll tell you what that is. So now if I try to log in, it will ask me authentication. But earlier it did not. You know the reason why? You logged out of Okta. There is no session now with Okta. There is no session with Pramati. But as soon as you got authenticated in the first step, it has created a session with Google, right? You access Google, authentication is done there, but now Google has to create a session, right, for me, so that when I access it again and again, it will not ask me the username and password again. It will not send me back. So the two sessions will be created, if you notice. One, it is with Pramati, another is with Google. So now logout comes into picture, like questionable how the logout works. When I log out here in Google, will it log out Pramati? Or if I log out Pramati, will it log out Google? So
How could you know you log out from Pramati? Google will know.
Google will?
This is
Yeah,
main
that is
server
what.
with-
Yeah, but there are options here where you can enable single logout. When you're configuring this app, you can enable that. When you enable that, we call it as global logout or single logout. You log out of any app, it will log you out of Pramati also. That is configurable and can be implemented. Okay. So the way we need to, the integration as a first step of integration, what we need to do is this in the Okta we need to create an app for the third party service. So if you are trying to give give access to Google or Facebook, you need to create an app for it in Okta first. So the way you will do is this is basically admin version of Okta. So you can see there I have created an app. You can create a new app as well. So let's say Java app is what I have created. No.
This is strange. Usually it will ask SAML version, do you want to create? But here I see different. They change the UI altogether. Let me see if there is any way I can trigger. I think classic UI I need to go. Okay. Yeah, I think they are developing a new interface where they did not provide the SAML support yet. SAML based app creation. Only we need to access the world UI and do it. So this is a web platform and SAML 2 is the type. And you can see here app name I need to give. Let's say Google in this case. And logo. This is where I can upload the logo SAML you have seen. No? This is where you can upload. So the single sign-on URL and all, you need to get it from Google actually. You need to ask Google what is your where you want to receive the SAML response. That URL you need to configure here. Because if you see the two login flows we have seen, service provider initiated and identity provider initiated. If it is service provider initiated, service provider is telling this is where I want to receive the response. If service provider is not initiating this login flow, but IDP is where what initiating this login flow, how does it know where it should give the response to, right? When I click on that app in my portal, where the response should be sent. It used this URL. You have configured it already. So as soon as I click that app icon, it knows exactly the SAML response should be sent to this URL. So these are some basic settings. Use the URL, and here is where you can configure the attributes, which attributes you want to send along with the response. And mostly that's it. And the last section is I'll show you the existing app for all the settings. So this is a SAML app. This is what name I have given and all these URLs. And you can see assignments. Here is where you can assign the people for this app. So here is where IT team will provision access to employee of Pramati. These are the apps this user can access. So I added just 3 users here. We can use any user to get into that app. Is it? So as the identity provider, Okta provides so many services. The other services like you can integrate this Okta with any of your existing. Like it can be directory service you can connect. Okay, or it can be if you already have some identity management system, that also you can integrate with Okta. So that Okta is your front layer for all the authentication stuff, for all the identity management. If behind the scenes, you can have a number of things connected. So when authentication request comes, it can talk to internal identity providers or authentication systems and get the authentication. Do you have any questions? Do you want to know anything more into this? No. I'll just show the slides. Huh? Okay. Right. So the few words that we use in this SAML implementation is like service provider, identity provider, SAML request, SAML response, and SP initiated login or ITP initiated login. The local logout is nothing but logging out of Google alone, not Pramati. Single logout is logging out from Pramati as well when you log out any of this. And if you see few observation, service provider will never interact with IDP. That means you don't need to expose identity provider to public also. For example, our identity provider Okta is an intranet installed. I did not expose it to public. So still, I can access it from Pramati. So I'm in Pramati now. I open my browser. I'm accessing Google. I have internet connection. I'm accessing Google. Google is sending back the HTML form, and the request is submitted from browser to Okta. That means I also have intranet here. So as long as my machine is able to access Okta, that is fine. It is not that Google should have access to Okta because they never interact each other. So again, service provider should know which identity provider it has to redirect to based on the domain name or from the email address user enters. And the authentication flow need not start from service provider always. You can also start from identity provider as well within the port or Okta, right? And it is asynchronous. Okay, that is important. So in the entire flow, if you see, you have access Google. It just given me the response. It is not waiting for this request to complete. Google is not expecting as soon as I given authentication request, it is not waiting for the response. It is just doing its own work. When response comes, that is when it is responding. So it is completely asynchronous. You come to me without authentication. I just tell you here is where you need to go and get your authentication done. But I'm not really expecting you to come back. I'm not waiting for you to come back. That's what it is. And it doesn't maintain any status too. Google doesn't maintain. Okay, there is a request has come. It won't keep that state anywhere. Comes it matches nothing. Everything it needs is there in the SAML response itself. So it doesn't need to maintain any state, whether it has really sent a request or not. And some of the SAML identity providers like G Suite, Okta, OneLogin, Centrify, etc. There are so many other as well. So in the advantage, if you see, it is providing SSO over internet. It is not like all the apps should be developed by one single vendor. It can be any service app developed by any vendor. You can still enable SSO between all these apps using this protocol. And the increased security is like you are entering credentials into Pramati, so you are not sending these credentials over internet also. Only if you want to access the same Google from your home, enable or expose Okta to public. Otherwise, not required. And it is platform independent because it is completely working on the web protocol and all. And user experience wise, yeah, I don't need to just log into Pramati and be able to access any third-party service by one click. And most of the SaaS applications implement this protocol. If I'm providing software as service, there are high chances that, and especially to this enterprises, I'm providing services, definitely the SAML implementation will be there. That is why you can see in Google also, you enter Pramati's credentials only. You are not creating really another password in Google because Google has implemented SAML and is talking to this. Same way you can see like in Corridor you access any other app. I'm not sure how that is implemented, but one use case I'm assuming is like it is talking to one identity provider.
So, Corridor we used CAS as
Oh.
so we integrate Ldap with CAS.
Oh, Ldap. Okay. So the other advantage is like the same software, when I install Okta in Pramati, the same software can serve purpose for any third-party service. It is not that for each third-party service I need to do or install any other software. It is just one single software we install. We are making all the third-party services to have this SSO in place. And for the service provider also, once they implement SAML, they can automate all this registration. Like if Pramati go and register an enterprise account with Jira, they can automate everything. All they need is like, okay, give me what is that? Okay, the SAML assertion URL and all. Just the URL configuration is what you need to enter, and it can. So once you implement in your service provider, the same thing can be used across. Sorry. And disadvantages we see, one thing I can see is like it doesn't work for native mobile apps because everything is working based on the web. The SAML protocol is dependent on web. It is dependent on browser to carry the authentication process. If you are developing, if it is a responsive app that you are creating for mobile, then no issues. It works because it is still a web view based. But if it is a native application that you have developed and all you can make is an API calls and all, then this implementation will not work. So you have to provide one more authentication on top of it. That is token based. It mostly works for native mobile apps. That's all I have for this today. Any more questions? Is that clear how everything is working? Maybe in the next session we can see exactly in the code how do we implement. Actually, Spring Security provides everything for you. It is just a configuration based. All you need to do to enable the SAML authentication. It's not. You don't need to spend so much time in implementing this as well. Cool. Thank you.